Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. It's Hugh Hewitt. I never thought I'd say it, but I miss Jimmy Carter. I miss Jimmy Carter. Joe Biden's speech last night was a complete flop, an utter failure. I mean, you'll find a couple of hyper-partisans in the blue bubble that say, oh, what a great speech. No, it wasn't. All he does is whatever Europe has already done. And he does it reluctantly and he does it late about Ukraine. I noted, I was on special report last night before the speech. And I want you to hear what I said because they changed this line. Maybe somebody was watching at the White House. Or maybe Ron Klain actually saw how stupid it was. He's the White House chief of staff and changed the line. But they released portions of the terrible speech that you heard last night before the speech. And I read them. And I said, huh? Cut number 32.
Hugh, what are you thinking about tonight? Obviously, we're going to hear first about Ukraine, but what about the rest?
Well, I saw some of the excerpts that the White House released early of the speech, Brett, and the president actually says in reference to Putin's strategy to invade Ukraine and divide the West that, quote, we were ready. If he says that, that will be what I'm talking about in the morning, because we weren't ready. We weren't ready for Afghanistan. We weren't ready for Omicron. We weren't ready for inflation. The president wasn't ready for Joe Manchin. And so if he says we were ready, that will be patently and obviously not true. And I want to go back to what I think Guy said earlier. If he does not declare an end to the import of Russian oil, that makes us party via the payment of cash to cluster bombs in Kharkiv and Kiev. And he really should deal straight with the American people tonight about Afghanistan. He ought to get right with us on that, on inflation, on a whole variety of things. I'm not an optimist tonight because he's not an orator and he's not telling the truth.
He didn't tell the truth. By the way, they changed that from we were ready to we are ready. Because you can't say we were ready because the whole world knows we weren't ready for anything. Nothing. Joe Biden is the least prepared president ever. He's like stuck in the 70s and the 80s. Speaking of the oil embargo, it didn't happen. What the president did do, it's a good improvement. I like it. He banned Russian airliners from American skies. That's good. But Europe had done that 3 days ago. And when it came to inflation, the dumbest thing I heard in the speech, the dumbest, is cut 27.
One way to fight inflation is to drive down wages and make Americans poorer. I think I have a better idea to fight inflation. Lower your costs, not your wages.
Lower your costs, not your wages. Has he lowered your costs? I mean, I'm just going to play that in every ad. What did he say about Afghanistan? I have no tape. He did not bring it up. He did not bring the loss of 13 American lives in the rushed exit, the collapse in Afghanistan. He did not talk about Democrats all over the country defunding the police. He said he doesn't want to defund the police. Sorry, the Democratic Party's on record, President Biden. And he's just, as I said, he's not the master of the teleprompter. And as I said to Brett yesterday on Special Report, he's not. It was terrible. His delivery is just terrible. He's an old man. And old men are wise, but they are not eloquent. Unless you get a Churchill in there. You're not. In fact, Brett asked me about Zelensky yesterday. And one of the things I thought after I said what I said, I'll play it for you. I wish I'd said, youth matters when you lead in war. Cut number 31, please.
A standing ovation there, Hugh, at the EU.
Well, Zelensky is certainly setting the standard very high for every international leader. Anyone who speaks into a microphone now is going to try and kind of funnel that genuine authenticity, that real emotion. He's not using notes. He's not using a teleprompter. We're going to watch Joe Biden struggle with his mortal enemy, the teleprompter, tonight. What Zelensky is doing is speaking courage in a very desperate situation. There were two Chechen hit teams in Kyiv looking for him. They've taken out both of them. But the man's life is on the line, and he's demonstrating courage, which is never not inspiring.
It is never not inspiring. We got no courage from the president last night. Cut number 28.
Tonight, I say to the Russian oligarchs and the corrupt leaders who bilked billions of dollars off this violent regime, no more. The United States, I mean it.
No, he doesn't mean it. No, he doesn't mean it. We did not sanction Russian oil. Brett on Special Report went through how much we buy every day. I don't have the numbers there. We buy millions of barrels of Russian oil over the course of the next 3 months. The world buys millions of bombs. Sanction the oil. Bar the export of Russian oil, and you will cripple that land. We are paying for the bombs that are falling in Kyiv and Kharkiv. We are. The West is. And everyone said, well, that'll drive up the price of oil on our European allies. Then we can produce more, number one. But so what? It's war crimes. Okay, a couple of reviews last night. Dana Perino. Look, there are two people on, there are many people, actually. There's Bill Hemmer, there's Dana Perino, there's Bret Baier, there are many others, Martha McCullum, and many others on Fox News that I listen to and have great respect for. But at the very top, Dana and Bret. So they anchored last night, and they gave their reviews after the speech was done. Dana Perino, cut number 34.
Let me be generous and say that there were 91 applause lines, but I have to say, I thought the speech was uninspired. I agree that it sounded like he did not actually change anything. It's almost as if they had the speech, it fell on the floor, all the pages got shuffled around, and they just put it back together, and they didn't actually reorder it. There were no transitions. There was no rhetorical lift. The strongest part of the speech was definitely the beginning and the very end. That's usually good because that's what people mostly remember. But I have to say, he goes from Ukraine straight into something that has already been given 3 Pinocchios by the Washington Post, which is a lie about the 2017 tax cuts, that it only went to help 1% of Americans. Again, that's not me saying that. That's the Washington Post with the 3 Pinocchios. I also think that he didn't say the words Build Back Better, but everything about Build Back Better was in here. You didn't hear a lot about energy independence. States of the Union addresses are supposed to be about your accomplishments, but many of their accomplishments, or what they consider accomplishments, are actually now vulnerabilities. One, I would say the American Rescue Plan, that Americans have cracked the code. They know that more spending has led to inflation. Energy policies. We see what's happened in Europe when you get too dependent on foreign sources of energy and don't produce your own, even while you're trying to transition to greener energy. I also think I have to give negative points for the mention in the same sentence of the killings of the police officers, Rivera and Mora, with this line, that he wants to hold law enforcement accountable. That's not what happened there. And there was nothing about prosecutions and making sure that career criminals are held in prison and not let out to commit other crimes. So of course
there wasn't. Dana is so spot on. She immediately went to the contradiction. She immediately went to the defund the police rhetoric, which he eschewed, but at the same time is embraced by action. Bret Baier followed with a very analytical take of what the president spoke about. Cut 35.
The president has very low approval ratings now on every major issue he talked about tonight, and there were a lot of different topics. Illegal immigration surge at the border, inflation at a 40-year high, surging crime in big cities, energy costs on the rise, even more now with Ukraine. So there was a choice this White House had. Some big new policy initiatives, or a big shift in policy, or a new sales pitch for the same policy. While there were some new projects in there, I didn't hear a big policy shift, and arguably the sales pitch is roughly the same, minus the 3 words, Build Back Better, legislation that stalled on Capitol Hill. He didn't say the 3 words together, but talked about the same policy. This president, as he's walking out of this hall, is politically in a vulnerable place, but he's dealing on a big stage in foreign policy and a big moment for the world. Let's bring
bullseye for Bret, and the president failed on the big stage. Ted Cruz went on with Sean Hannity after the speech, cut number 33.
The 10th State of the Union that I've been on the floor of the House of Representatives to hear from the 3rd different president. And this was the most out-of-the-touch State of the Union speech that I have ever heard. Biden went through a litany of acknowledging some of the problems we face in this country, but utterly denying any responsibility, any culpability for it. So he acknowledged galloping inflation, but didn't say a word about the trillions in spending and trillions of debt he rammed through that caused that inflation. He acknowledged gas prices are skyrocketing, but didn't say a word about the war on domestic energy production that his administration led. He acknowledged the need to secure our southern border, but didn't say a word about the failure of his administration to enforce the laws, leading to the highest rate of illegal immigration in 61 years. On Ukraine, he acknowledged Russia's invasion, but didn't say a word about the disastrous weakness from his administration, the catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan, or his decision to waive sanctions on Russia on Putin's Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is what directly led to this invasion. On every issue.
Hey, Ted Cruz is right. It was the worst in 10 years. I've been following these for 40. It was a bad speech. Update on Ukraine when I come back. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Congresswoman Cathy McMorris Rodgers has served Washington State in the United States House of Representatives since 1994, so she's heard a lot of State of the Union. I welcome her back. Good morning, Congresswoman. Great to have you.
Good morning, Hugh.
How do you rate last night's speech against the others that you've heard?
Well, I was overall greatly disappointed. It wasn't very inspiring, and it fell flat on the floor. Clearly, the president just doubled down on his socialist agenda. At the beginning, it was good that he spent time talking about Ukraine and the importance of us standing by Ukraine, but still, he's failing to say that American energy is the solution to pushing back on Putin. And we all know that Putin's economy, Russia's economy, is entirely dependent upon energy production and exports. And our greatest weapon against Putin and his aggression right now in Ukraine and the funding of his military through energy would be for us to unleash American energy, for us to flip the switch. And he has completely blocked our efforts to put energy on the table.
Now, Congresswoman McMorris Rodgers, you're the ranking Republican on Energy and Commerce. That's one of the big three committees in the House. And that means you'll be chairing it next year. If polling is any indication, it looks like a red wave building, and he didn't do anything to stop it last night. What would you do vis-a-vis American energy, and would you sanction, as I've been urging, Russian oil? I can't believe Americans are actually buying Russian oil right now, or allowed to, because we're just funding cluster bombs in Kharkiv.
Well, I completely agree. We should not be buying a single barrel of oil from Russia right now. And we currently we are purchasing 11% of our crude oil from Russia. And it's coming in through Massachusetts, who won't allow any pipelines to be built into Massachusetts to deliver domestic oil and gas. It's coming in through Washington State and California, Hawaii and Alaska. But we should not be purchasing a single barrel of oil from Putin and Russia. We have abundant natural resources, and we should be using them. And they absolutely right now should be a part of that response to Putin's aggression in Ukraine. It's the quickest way to cripple his economy and to cripple his income as he continues to use energy to fund the aggression in Ukraine. And right now, this administration is more tied to their religion of climate change than actually doing what it's going to take to push to defeat Putin in Ukraine. At the same time, President Zelensky continues to call on us to stand for freedom and sovereignty and self-determination. And this is such a defining moment for Ukraine, for the United States. And we should be leading on this. We should be leading in unleashing American energy, flipping the switch, stop the shutdown of American energy at the time that Putin's using it for his aggression.
Now, Congresswoman, there is no impediment to our sanctioning Russian oil, is there? We can just stop it today with an executive order. Am I correct about that?
Yes. If President Biden chose to do this, he could do it. And I also know that if President and he's concerned about rising gas prices in America, if he were to sanction Russian oil currently coming into the United States. My plea to him is to open up American energy. We should be permitting new plants, LNG, liquefied natural gas plants that have been waiting over a year for their permits. We should be saying yes. And many of those permits, 4 out of the 6, are actually targeting our ability to export LNG to Europe. We should be saying yes to the Keystone Pipeline. President Biden on day one blocked, after the Keystone Pipeline had been permitted, he blocked this pipeline that would allow us to bring in crude oil from Canada, and instead continues to allow for Russia to provide oil to the United States, 11% that's coming in right now to meet our domestic needs. He should be allowing us to explore energy exploration on federal lands, which he has blocked. America is blessed with abundant resources, and this is the time that we should be switching on flipping the switch and turning on American energy production here to meet our own domestic needs, keep prices lower, but also stop the aggression by Putin in Ukraine.
I'm talking with Cathy McMorris Rodgers, Congresswoman extraordinaire from Washington State's 5th Congressional District. She is the ranking Republican on Energy and Commerce, one of the big three committees of Congress, so she'll be the chairman next year. So everyone will want to talk to you next year, Cathy McMorris Rodgers. I hope you'll continue to come and talk to me on the show. I want to go for a moment to, even if you're a climate absolutist, a climate alarmist, all you want is for oil to cost more. That's what you want. You want people to pay a gas tax that's higher. I know Europe depends upon Russian oil, but is there any moral dimension that they are ignoring? If we led, would they follow? I just don't understand how anyone can wring their hands or do any sanctions on Russia and still buy their oil. It's his lifeline. It's what's keeping Putin alive.
I completely agree. It's clear. 30%. The energy production and exports in Russia, it drives their economy. That's where Putin has gotten the money to fund his military and his aggression. I completely agree. You know, it's Putin. It's President Putin that's through the years been funding the NGOs, the non-government organizations in Europe that are anti-fracking, that are educating the Europeans as to the dangers of fracking. So Europe doesn't do any fracking. New technology that has been developed in America that really has opened up the shale revolution and the natural gas explosion that is really has been driving down our carbon gas emissions. But Putin wants Europe to continue to be dependent upon him, so that funds his economy. And right now, that's what is allowing him to do this aggression in Ukraine. Putin has been known to cut off the pipelines in the middle of the winter to Ukraine to try to get them to submit. Putin has used energy for years, and even if you are, you know, what I see is that this is the difference between blood on the lives of men and women, boys and girls in Ukraine versus America opening up our energy, saying yes to more energy production here so that we can stop the aggression. And we do it cleaner. Our oil and natural gas is 40% less carbon impact than Russian oil and gas. Again, America leads. We need to unleash technology, innovation, so that America can both meet our energy needs and continue to lead the world in bringing down carbon emissions.
Now, Congresswoman, I want to play for you maybe the low point of the speech. The president was talking about inflation, and he put up a straw man saying that you're going to cut your wage. Nobody's going to cut wages. We can't get enough workers. We're rising. Wages are rising, but not as fast as inflation. Here's what the president said. Cut 27.
One way to fight inflation is to drive down wages and make Americans poorer. I think I have a better idea to fight inflation. Lower your costs, not your wages.
All right, so how does he do that? That's the dumbest thing I've heard from that podium ever. I mean, there have been some pretty dumb things that lower your costs in an inflation. How do you do that? That's not possible.
It's an example of how divorced from reality this administration has been on issue after issue. Wages have been going up all across the country. What our businesses need is relief from the command and control that this administration is imposing upon them. And he has no plan to address inflation. He takes no ownership that it has been the record government spending that is driving inflation right now, that is driving the cost of gas at the pump and how much we're paying at the grocery store. I know in Eastern Washington, it is having a real impact, and it is all across this country. And this especially hits the low and middle income Americans, those that truly are living paycheck to paycheck, trying to make ends meet. And when inflation hits, when the dollar store has to raise its prices from $1 to $1.25, right? That is hitting the low income the hardest. And the president just failed to acknowledge any impact that his policy has had, and this idea that somehow businesses can cut their costs and raise wages. I mean, it's divorced from reality.
All right, last question, Congresswoman. This goes into the inner workings. After you leave the House floor and you're in the hallway, I don't know if you guys all get on the train or if you walk in the tunnels, but I saw Leader McCarthy looking at Whip Scalise, exchanging those knowing glasses like, oh my gosh, this is bad. What did you hear in the murmuring of people outside in the hallway?
Well, the line about inflation, that was one that members were reflecting on. Just the fact that this president obviously has never run a business. He doesn't understand what it takes to run a business. Just a lot of disappointment. The fact that he was doubling down on his socialist agenda, the disappointment over Ukraine and his unwillingness to unleash American energy, which would be our greatest weapon against Putin and his aggression in Ukraine. And he continues to stand by his radical climate agenda over the Ukrainian people and the possibility of further aggression, whether it's by Putin or China ultimately. I think there was just this sense of it being empty and falling short of being the speech to inspire America that you always want to hear from the president at the State of the Union.
Yeah, I want to check in with Ken Calvert, who's in charge of your ranking member of Armed Services. I didn't hear anything about raising defense spending. Nothing. Even Germany has figured this out, Congresswoman. That's a bonus question. Were you amazed? Not a word about our defense spending.
Absolutely. It is on every American's mind right now. Is what is our future? When is how far is President Putin going to push it? They are basically saying, well, Kiev is going to fall. It may take longer. Instead of it being days now, it's going to take weeks. But then how much farther does Putin push it? We all know that China wants Taiwan, and the signal that this is sending, and ultimately what it means for the safety and the security of Americans is on every American's heart and mind. And the president just seems to, he just doesn't understand what it takes to protect our country, to make sure that the citizens of this country are safe and secure. And the number one responsibility of the federal government is to protect the country. And he just failed on that front.
Big strike and a miss last night, swing and a miss. Cathy McMorris Rodgers, Congressman extraordinaire from Washington's 5th Congressional District. Thank you. Keep coming back. Candidate Hugh Hewitt still on the West Coast for another couple of weeks. He'll be back in D.C. mid-March inside the Beltway. But Jake Sherman has got it covered for us. Good morning, Jake.
Hi, Hugh. How are you?
Good. I read Punchbowl News this morning, and I know that you guys are trying to be fair to everyone, but I just got done talking to Cathy McMorris Rodgers, who has listened to these since 1994 when she joined the Congress. I've been reviewing them live on air the next day since 2000. That was awful. That was just terrible, Jake. I couldn't believe how bad it was. So you spin it the other way, or at least report on what the Democrats are trying to cover up, because that was a disaster.
Well, just a point of clarification, Cathy McMorris Rodgers since 2004, not 1994.
I'm sorry, I say 19. I'm sorry.
No, I'm not going to spin it anyway. I mean, I think what he was trying to achieve here. Let me put it actually as best as Susan Glasser did, my former boss of Politico, who's now at the New Yorker, who likened it to like trying to put a new lead on a story. She, as a journalist, listen, I think that he had to address Ukraine. He did so. He didn't make the case, at least in my estimation, why it was important to be in Ukraine. I think something that a lot of American people want to know and want to understand. And listen, it was a reminder to me and to many other people and to members of Congress about all he hasn't gotten done, that he promises to get done and he wants to get done. I don't think it was good, bad, or indifferent. I think they were trying to achieve a reset of some sort. Did they get that? I mean, you could make the case that yes, they started talking about what they'd like to get done once again, but I don't think this solves, and I was just texting with a member of Congress right now, a Democrat, I don't think this solves the main problem for Democrats, which is they have no momentum legislatively. Like the president, like, let's just deal with the reality here. The president's numbers are terrible. He has no legislative plans in the offing, and no momentum to get anything done. Yeah, he'll get a Supreme Court pick through. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I think that's kind of my view on the night. This is mostly a TV event, Hugh. That's kind of my view of it.
Yeah, but there can be bad TV events where you don't ever turn in again. The first episode of the Joe Biden show. And there can be good ones like 1883. And I thought last night was just awful. And look, he's an old guy. He's 79 years old. I'm 66. When I'm 79, I don't want to be giving primetime speeches with 30 million people watching. Probably went down to 3 million.
Unless you're president, Hugh, you could be president.
You don't have to. George Washington wrote his out. That's what Joe Biden should have done. I want to note one thing, though. I was on Special Report last night doing pregame show, and I said, I got the excerpts here, and it says, Ukraine, we were ready. And I said to Brett Barry, that's nuts. We weren't ready. We were completely taken by surprise. We thought we could talk them off of the tree, and we didn't. And we're completely befuddled, and all we've done. And then he changed the speech when he says, we are ready. Someone must have figured out you can't say we were ready when we weren't ready. I thought he would sanction Russian oil and gas. We are paying for cluster bombs. You're a parent of a young child. You must sympathize, as I do as a grandparent of young kids, with the parents and grandparents of Kiev and Kharkiv who've got cluster bombs falling in and apartments collapsing, and it's being paid for by Russian oil, and we're buying Russian oil. What are we doing, Jake?
I think you've hit on the thing that we will hear a lot of in the next couple of days, which is why are we sending all this money to Russia to buy oil? And I think that's something I did not think he was going to do that last night, but I did think he would obviously do the airspace, the banning Russian aircraft from U.S. airspace. But this is going to be the big thing over the next couple of weeks if this continues, is why are we shipping money to Russia? And how do we stop doing that? And how do we stop doing that now without causing massive spikes to American consumers? I think that's one of the main things we're going to hear.
Oh, I'm not going to worry about American consumers because we can produce our own. I got to worry about European consumers. But if you're a climate absolutist or a climate alarmist, depending on what you call them, they wouldn't be unhappy with the price of gas going up 30%. They would not be unhappy with the world price for oil staying at wherever it is this morning or going higher with the cutoff of that. It's at $110 a barrel for WTI and $111 per Brent. So that's up 6 and nearly 7% on both markets, because I think they know when the American people or when the West figures out we are paying for the cluster bombs, we're going to stop buying Russian oil. I think they know that. So why are they, Jake, you know their White House. I know you're up on the Hill, so you get a reflected version of it. It's like they don't have an original idea. All they do is whatever Europe has already done, and he didn't even raise defense spending last night. Did you get any commentary about that?
Well, let me just reverse and give the devil's advocate point of view. I think they would argue that they are working with Europe to get these things done, and they are being done in concert. So that's their point of view. Listen, the defense spending piece is going to come to a head, and I want to bring up one more thing, Hugh, that's a big issue that will be a big issue for you and a big issue for a lot of your listeners, which will come to a head in the next couple of days. The government shuts down on March 11th. They're trying to do a big spending package. There's a disagreement right now between Republicans and Democrats about whether that money for the Ukrainian military should be counted as part of defense spending against the cap of defense spending, or should it be emergency spending? This is a huge issue and impacts not only government funding, but also impacts the aid package to Ukraine, which is immediately necessary according to both parties.
Yeah, the Republicans can't fold on that. We're not going to take I think it's $60 billion defense cut. We're not going to do that. That's what the Democrats want right now is a cut in America's defenses to pay for Ukraine assistance. That's not going to fly, Jake. Does anyone on the left think that's going to fly?
Well, Chuck Schumer said it's the only way to get it done. He didn't really comment on it specifically.
Yeah, Chuck Schumer also started to stand up last night when nobody else was. That was the most visually gripping moment of the night, wasn't it?
I was sitting right in the balcony in the gallery right next to him, so I had a very good view of that. It was humorous, but no, it's going to be a big issue. Mitch McConnell came out hard against it yesterday, very hard, and I imagine he's going to continue to come out hard against it. And we need to see some movement in the next couple of days here, Hugh, because it's March 2nd today. That gives us 9 days before the government shuts down. They're trying to do a massive omnibus spending bill to fund the government through September of this year. So I don't know how that's going to be solved, but it's going to need to be solved because two things need to happen. Government needs to be funded, and a big Ukraine aid package needs to pass.
Jake, I just got you know the political numbers. You know how upside down the Democrats are. The president even went against defunding the police last night, despite the fact his party's got all these prosecutors out there that aren't prosecuting and members of Congress who are calling for defunding the police. He's trying to separate himself. It ain't going to work. How desperate are Democrats? Now, we had Ted Deutsch retired. Did anyone retire yesterday? Miss anyone quitting yesterday? Because every day another Democrat quits.
No one retired yesterday. I mean, listen, they're not in a good and we said this morning. The president is in a bad political position. His party has a bad November in store historically, and based on the numbers he has right now, I don't think that anything he did last night helps that, especially because Congress is not moving on any of his priorities. If you accept their argument that if you do these set of things, then their political standing will improve, then Congress needs to move on those things for their political standing to improve, and Congress is not moving on those things.
If I accept Dwayne's arguments about what a producer needs to do, he'd never be here. So that's not going to happen. Jake, I want to finish with some good news and bad news for Punchbowl News. First of all, everyone should subscribe to it. I read it every single morning, and that's why I know what's going on in Congress at the start of the show. Punchbowlnews.com. Celebrated your first anniversary. That's the good news. Congratulations, 1 year of Punchbowl News. That was a really great write-up, a great party. That's the good news. The bad news is I'm looking for my invitation, Jake, and it's not here. I've been looking.
You were in California.
I'm just looking around, Jake, and I'm saying to myself, I think I've had him on every week that Punchbowl News has existed. What did I do? Did I upset Anna? What's the problem?
No, that's an oversight. As you can imagine, I am. I'm as a
I think this
man,
phone works.
I am not.
I'm pretty sure it does.
You have an open invitation, and we'll make sure you get any other invitations.
Well, I mean, was it good food? Was it good? Was it an open bar? Tell us about it, because I sure wasn't there. Dwayne wasn't there. Just tell us about it.
It was a good party. It was. Yeah, I don't know what else.
You know what happens? You guys are all
kind, not invited.
Yeah, you're all like Mike Allen used to come on this show once a week, and then after 10 years, he said, "See you later." Never got invited. Now, Jake, you're going to build this thing, make $1 billion, and you're going to forget your friends. But I'm not bitter, Jake. I'm not bitter at all.
I will not forget how kind you've been to me.
We would have even taken a table by the kitchen.
Jake Sherman, good to talk to you. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, yeah.
Jake Sherman on Twitter. Follow Punchbowl News on Twitter and sign up for the email, even if you don't get invited to their parties. Even if they don't invite you ever to their parties, you still got to read their email. That's when you have a really, really good product, is when you still want it and you still promote it, even when you don't get invited to the party. Don't go. The phone works. Well done, Generalissimo. Glad you came to work today. I'll be right back, America.
One way to fight inflation is to drive down wages and make Americans poorer. I think I have a better idea to fight inflation. Lower your costs, not your wages.
Welcome back, America. The most incoherent line of a very incoherent State of the Union speech by the president. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by Brian Wesbury, chief economist for First Trust in Chicago. Brian, that line, lower your costs. I think that's going to be in every Republican ad. You can't lower your costs when inflation is going to be in double digits.
That's exactly right. And no one, see, here's the problem. One of the problems that he has is that it's the Keynesian logic that says when unemployment goes down, inflation goes up, and that's what he's trying to refer to. It doesn't really make sense the way he said it, but that's what he's trying to refer to. So for all those years, there's what they're saying is, we can't raise interest rates because that would slow the economy down and put people out of work. We have to keep them low. We have to keep printing money. And as a result, in the 1970s, we ended up with, obviously permanent is not the perfect word, but basically a decades-long inflation problem.
Let me ask you,
That's
Brian,
where
if you had the
that's where
same
we
shudder I
stand
did.
today. Go
Last,
ahead.
I'm a Nixon guy, so I know the biggest domestic policy mistake that Nixon made was wage and price controls. And the only way to hold costs down in an inflationary spiral is to enforce wage and price. They don't work. It was a disaster. Do you think he's setting us up for that?
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised if they tried. I think it would be a huge. It would kind of mirror what's happening to Russia right now. You become a pariah because it wouldn't work. We have shortages. We have supply chain problems. We printed too much money. What we did, Hugh, is shutting down the economy and spending all that money is literally like being in a car accident, and for the economy, it wrecked the supply chains. And then we tried to fix it by giving morphine, which is the money printing press. And so for a while, everybody thought everything was fine. Like, hey, look at this. We're living through it. Then we tried to get up and stand on a broken leg, and it doesn't work. And we have all this inflation. The only way to fix it is to get ourselves off the morphine. And they, I don't believe, have the inner strength to do what's necessary to stop the inflation. That's why they keep blaming it on other people and won't look in the mirror. Maybe the Fed, maybe Jerome Powell will do the right thing. But it didn't happen in the 70s, and it's because it's hard.
Now, Brian, I got to ask you, because you have observed for a long time, more than 2,000 civilians have been killed by Russians in a week. They've probably lost between 5,000 and 6,000. Their foreign minister is warning about World War III will be a devastating nuclear war in an attempt to stop the world from creating a pariah. I think to stop the oil and gas sanctions, which assuredly are going to come when people see the scenes. What's going to happen to oil's at $110 a barrel this morning? I assume every wildcatter in America is out there drilling a well where they won't get arrested.
Yeah, there are leases that are available. I mean, we have two problems with, well, three really. Number one, you can't getting new leases on federal lands is impossible. Getting new leases on even private lands is impossible. So they don't want to use them up. Second, they're scared to death of getting regulated like crazy. And third, financial institutions of some of these large financial lenders who think they're going to get in trouble if they lend to oil companies are kind of holding back on cash. And so yeah, I think the wildcatters will come out. Oil is overvalued now. Once things settle down in Ukraine, I think oil will come back down, but it is not going back to where it was. We printed 40% more money. That means we're going to have higher prices. There's nothing anybody can do about it.
If we sanction Russian oil and gas, what will it do to the price of oil? Because it's 1 out of 10 barrels created in the world right now. And no one should be buying it because it's buying cluster bombs for civilians. 1 minute, Brian. What happens if we do that?
Right. Yeah, I think the market already reflects the fact that it's likely to happen. And so oil will go. I mean, look, we could see $150 barrel oil. We could. But that's kind of sort of I would call that a kind of a clickbait number. It's already it's already going to cost us well over $5 a gallon in California, and close to $4 a gallon everywhere else in the country. It already there. It could go even higher.
So Russian oil and gas sanctions are already priced in?
Yeah, I think to a big extent. Yeah.
Brian Wesbury, always a pleasure. Follow him on Twitter at Wesbury. Follow me to hour number 3. John Cornyn will be joining me for the view from the Senate side. And Cathy McMorris Rodgers last hour. I'll be right back. Don't go to America. It's Hugh Hewitt on the day after the State of the Union on Ash Wednesday. And don't forget, Food for the Poor banner at the top of HughHewitt.com. Please be generous on this Ash Wednesday. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Coming up later in the hour, Senator John Cornyn of Texas joins us for his take on the President's State of the Union. I also have two guests this hour who want to join Senator Cornyn in that chamber next year. Mark Brnovich, the Attorney General of Arizona, will be along later. And I'm joined by Jane Timken, who is running for the Republican nomination for Senate in Ohio, a race that the Republican will almost surely win, given the red nature of Ohio. Good morning, Jane Timken. Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Thanks for having me.
You know, last night I had to tweet out when the president saluted the new Intel plant plans in Columbus. That's for Mike DeWine to take a victory lap. That's for the Ohio legislature that you helped turn Republican to take a victory lap. He didn't even mention that. What'd you think about that?
No, I think you're very correct. It was Mike DeWine and his investments in Ohio to make sure, working with the state legislature, all Ohioans were cheering because of this Intel $20 billion investment. But Joe Biden takes the victory lap. It's again an example of Joe Biden and his delusional fantasy land. And in this investment in Intel in Ohio is going to be so fantastic. 3,000 jobs. We're already starting to see the effects of the beginnings of the investment, and it's exciting news for Ohio. And he wants to take credit for turning Ohio around, but it is Ohioans and hardworking Republicans here in Ohio who have turned Ohio around.
You know, the knock-on effects of a big tech arriving are enormous. It happened in Northern Virginia with Amazon. It happened in Ann Arbor with Google. Now it's going to happen in Columbus. The downside of that, of course, is that houses are going to become more expensive as people move there. And the president's answer for inflation last night, I got to play this for you, Jane Timken, to get your response. He said in cut number, I want to get the inflation cut, number 27.
One way to fight inflation is to drive down wages and make Americans poorer. I think I have a better idea to fight inflation. Lower your costs, not your wages.
That's not an answer, Jane Timken. What did you make of that? That's a non-answer to inflation.
No, it just shows how out of touch Joe Biden and the Democrats are. They don't understand economics. Clearly, it shows that he's been in office too long, in politics too long. How is he going to lower costs? When he has attacked our oil and gas and energy industry, which is a direct result of rising inflation and spending trillions and trillions of dollars of taxpayer dollars that is increasing inflation. And if this is a tax on every American, it is affecting the people who can least afford it. I talk to people who have sticker shock when they go to the gas pump, when they go to the grocery store. People are starting to question whether they can afford this. A few weeks ago, it was estimated $200 a month for a family. This is going to hit people hard, and he's doing nothing to stop inflation.
So, Jane Timken, if I can talk to you about the election, it was an obvious effort last night to turn 2022 into something other than the red wave it's going to be. Since last we talked, you picked up an important endorsement. I'm holding up for our watchers on the Salem News Channel. My $5 bill that was signed wrongly and illegally by Senator Rob Portman when he bet me $5. He had to write "Go Browns" on there. I keep that here. Rob Portman endorsed you since last we talked, even though he's a Bengals fan. He got something right from the perspective of the Timken campaign. How big is that for your campaign?
It's huge. It's going to make a huge difference in this campaign. His endorsement is significant, and as he said, he knows me, he trusts me, and it shows that he knows that I'm going to be part of the governing majority who's going to be an effective person in the Senate. The people of Ohio know me as someone who rolls up her sleeves, gets the job done. I'm a workhorse, not a show horse, and someone is a proven effective leader. I did it when I took on, quite frankly, the establishment to become the chair of the Ohio Republican Party. President Trump endorsed me to do that, but I also knew I needed to unify the party and make very effective, smart decisions to deliver supermajorities in the State House and keeping our statewides and keeping our congressional delegation and delivering Ohio for President Trump. That kind of work ethic and can-do attitude is something I'm going to bring to the Senate. But it's also me listening to Ohioans. Quite frankly, when I heard the speech last night, I wondered what Ohioans' reaction would be. There was nothing in that speech that I think would alleviate their concerns, nothing real. When he says he's going to fund the police now after years of saying they're going to defund the police. I spent a lot of time talking to our police officers. The crime rate is skyrocketing. When he says he's going to combat opioids and the opioid epidemic without securing the southern border, people here in Ohio are suffering because of the drugs coming across the southern border. Every single one of his platitudes last night was no relief for Ohioans, and we need now more than ever to take back the House and Senate to put a stop to their ridiculous policies.
So, Jane Timken, after Rob Portman endorsed you, Bernie Moreno dropped out. I think that was after Rob Portman endorsed Jane Timken. I'm not sure. So it's down to a 5-person race. I moderated the debate. I'm neutral in the primary. I'm just curious, where did the Bernie supporters go?
Well, good question. I think I think you look at the polling. A lot of them went to me. Bernie was a great candidate. Had brought a lot to the table, have a lot of respect for him. And I think that this race is a wide open race. And what I think is key is the fact that I have been putting in the investment to actually spend the time talking to voters and also spending the time rolling up my sleeves and doing the work that building a campaign that is a winning campaign that will be successful in this May primary and then going forward into November.
When is the primary, Jane Timken? Which day?
May 3rd.
So we're in the bell lap, basically.
Oh yeah, oh definitely. And I built an army of supporters. I've built the infrastructure to win, and we have a winning message. And people know me as someone who is the true America First candidate. We've got a lot of people in this race who are Johnny-come-latelys, who are trying to put on their Trump credentials, but they, quite frankly, are overcompensating for their lack of support of President Trump previously.
Let me ask you about the Ohio Supreme Court. I've unsuccessfully tried to persuade my law school roommate, Tim Butler, another Michigan man like Rob Portman and me, Michigan law, to run for the Ohio Supreme Court because you got a 4-3 court that keeps defeating the will of the people in drawing these maps. You've got a May primary. What is going to happen with these maps?
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation. It's quite frankly a constitutional crisis. It is the legislature's role and the redistricting commission to draw these maps. I think we have a rogue Ohio Supreme Court, and their agenda is not the agenda and will of the Ohioans and the Ohio people and the Ohio voters. This is going to have to be resolved. This is an untenable situation, and I think that the redistricting commission and the state legislature have come up with maps that are consistent with the court's rulings, and they should be approved.
Now, Attorney General Yost is a friend of mine. I understand the legal problem that presents when a state Supreme Court keeps overturning a state redistricting commission and a state legislature decision on legislative maps and congressional maps. But obviously, you're going to have to do what Pennsylvania did. Go to the federal courts because the Pennsylvania Republicans got screwed by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. That does not happen to the Illinois Democrats who gerrymander or the New York Democrats who gerrymander. It only happens to Republican maps. Is there any way to get to federal court to stop this craziness?
There is one federal court case currently pending, and quite frankly, I'm not overly optimistic about that outcome. We shall see. But we are getting to the point where I think the Ohio Supreme Court is not recognizing that it is a third and separate branch of government and that it cannot exert its will upon a separate branch, being the state legislature.
Am I correct? It's the 3 Democrat justices, the lame duck Republican in the majority against the 3 Republican justices. So everyone knows it's not a rule of law issue. It's just partisanship.
It absolutely, and it absolutely is. It's an agenda. It is, we know that Eric Holder and his redistricting group is focusing on Ohio. This is part of their plan to keep Republicans from taking back the majority. Quite frankly, the districts that they want, you cannot draw in Ohio. And so but look, I'm focused on the Senate race and what I can do for Ohioans, and we'll get through this. But I'm out there every day talking about the border, inflation, defending our police and standing up for our men and women in blue and making sure that we have someone who's going to fight for Ohio jobs and Ohio manufacturers and our farmers. And that's what
that is terrific. Jane Timken, just make sure part 2 of Intel goes to Warren, please. Somewhere in Trumbull County. That's all I'm asking. That's not much. Jane Timken, OH on Twitter. Thank you, Jane Timken. Congratulations on getting Rob Portman's endorsement. Probably as important as President Trump's in Ohio, and she's got one of 2. We're waiting on the president. Thank you much, Jane Timken. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Senator John Cornyn of the great state of Texas has listened to, I think, 22 State of the Unions. Maybe it's only 20. Senator Cornyn joins me now. It's a lot of State of the Unions. Where did last night's rank on your favorite hits, Senator Cornyn?
Well, Hugh, I'm sorry to say, I think it was a lackluster performance. The only exception being when the president tried to rally the nation behind the brave people of Ukraine, although he mistook Ukraine for Iran at one point, as you know.
Yes,
but
and Uranians, too. Even Kamala Harris kind of balked at that one. But he's, he wrestles with a teleprompter every time he gets it. It's like his mortal enemy.
It was not a great speech, and I think, unfortunately, it's a rehash of a lot of his failed domestic policies. But I am happy that now he's declared COVID-19 cured, and that he personally has rallied the world to help the Ukrainians in their battle for sovereignty and freedom.
Senator, can I ask you just an obvious question on the mind of every American? Everybody takes their mask off, hooray! But then you sit with a chair between each other. Does no one understand how to message anything in this government? They do not know how to message anything. Either it's over or it's not over.
Yeah, I think it's of course, we were a little bit surprised. We thought Nancy Pelosi was going to require people to have masks and take COVID tests, even though they've been fully vaccinated, but she relented. But they couldn't quite figure out how to deal with the president not having a mask on and 535 potentially members of Congress crammed into the House chamber, all wearing masks and looking like they're afraid of getting COVID, even though they've been fully vaccinated. So I agree. It's a mixed message. Unfortunately, their scare tactics have rendered them less than credible when it comes to things like the pandemic.
Well, Senator, let's turn to the crisis in Ukraine. Breaking news from Reuters. More than 2,000 civilians have been killed during the Russian invasion's first week. This is American dollars buying Russian oil that turns into cluster bombs on civilians in Kyiv and Kharkiv and other cities. When are we going to stop buying Russian oil?
Can't happen soon enough. I've joined legislation that's been introduced to do precisely that. But, there's a larger, I hate to use the word conspiracy here, but I think it's appropriate. Putin and his propaganda machine have tried to convince Europe that they could go entirely on renewables. Meanwhile, knowing that that's not entirely possible if you retire all their coal-fired power plants and nuclear plants, they become more and more dependent on Russian oil and gas, and that's a strategic vulnerability that is going to take a while to get out of. The United States needs to unleash its considerable natural resources and continue to export natural gas to Europe and other places where they need to use that instead of Russian oil and gas. You're exactly right. This $100 a barrel oil that Putin has now gotten the price up because of this conflict and uncertainty associated with that is paying for the very munitions he's using to kill those innocent Ukrainians, and it's got to stop.
Now, I had a bingo card of 3 things I was hoping for last night, Senator. Least likely was any seriousness about spending in America because of inflation. Of course, he just wants to spend more. Number 2, though, I thought he would sanction Russian oil because it's obvious we're paying for these devices that are going there. And then number 3, American oil production. And, you can't do one without the other. And he said nothing. I guess 4th would have been defense spending. But that didn't happen either. I mean, there was nothing there having to do with the reality of America in 2022.
Exactly. I think the one thing I give him credit for is rallying the public, American public, behind our efforts to help the Ukrainians. But the truth is, Europe and particularly our NATO partners are the ones that are taking the lead on that. We're helping, but unfortunately, I think there's more we could do, and we need to do it faster, providing them the lethal defensive weapons they need to defend their country. And we need to continue to shore up our NATO partners. But I thought the rest of it was a rehash of his failed policies. He really didn't offer any solutions. I'm afraid that he realizes this is going to be a disastrous midterm election, and he just doesn't know how to turn the ship around.
Can I got to play for you the worst thing that he said last night because it's so incoherent. It's cut number 27 on inflation.
One way to fight inflation is to drive down wages and make Americans poorer. I think I have a better idea to fight inflation. Lower your costs, not your wages.
All right, so Senator, first you stand up the giant straw man. We want to cut people's wages. And then you burn it down with a promise to lower their costs, which is not possible. That's not the government's job, unless he wants price control. Do you think that's a setup to price controls?
That was incomprehensible, what he said.
It was.
And I don't think he even knows what he said or what he was trying to achieve there. I think he was trying to thread the needle and to claim that he and his spending policies and Democratic spending policies are not pouring gasoline on the fire of inflation, and it's just not true. It's like when he says the Build Back Better program that failed thanks to Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema costs zero. It's just not credible.
Now, let me turn very briefly to soon-to-be Justice Brown Jackson. Now, I know there are hearings and things could happen because there's some Gitmo issues that we've got to go over with her.
Right.
But the over-under, I think, is 65. And I think they botched the rollout completely. They took a big win and they muffled it under a disaster that is the Ukraine war. But generally, as you sit down to talk to her, what do you want answered by the nominee?
Well, I agree about the messaging. I think this is supposed to be a high point of the Biden presidency, nominating somebody to the Supreme Court. Judge Jackson's known to the Judiciary Committee because we had her before us on her circuit court nomination. I think obviously Supreme Court's different than circuit courts or district court positions. And frankly, I want to try to get some clear answers about her view of the appropriate judicial role. You may remember there was a story about Joe Biden asking Robert Bork about the Ninth Amendment and unenumerated rights. I think that's something we need to ask about because people have been reading things into the Constitution in the name of the living Constitution, and I want to know where she's going to go with that and try to, frankly, get some clarity on whether she's just going to be another politician wearing black robes with lifetime tenure or whether she's going to call balls and strikes.
I hope you talk to her about what's going on in redistricting, Senator, because the Pennsylvania and Ohio Supreme Courts are turning down Republican-drawn maps, and Illinois and New York, which have gerrymandered the hell out of Republicans, are safe because nobody dares turn over a Democratic map. It's driving me. Does judiciary ever get into this? It's crazy what the state Supreme Courts are doing.
Yeah, this is an old playbook, Hugh, as you know, trying to resort to state constitutions rather than the federal Constitution in order to avoid federal judicial review. But I think at some point the Supreme Court has to, call foul on that playbook. These redistricting does affect interstate commerce and is a federal issue ultimately. And I think the Supreme Court needs to weigh in. I'm very concerned about it, as you are.
All right, now let's turn to what Jake Sherman of Punchbowl News told me earlier in the show, which is that you're running up against a deadline on the continuing resolution to fund the government. And apparently Democrats are saying if we send money to Ukraine, we have to cut our defense budget. What is going on there, Senator Cornyn?
Well, that's not going to happen. There needs to be at least parity between defense and domestic spending. Senator Shelby has been negotiating that for the Senate, and there was at least an initial agreement. But now that they are talking about a supplemental to help Ukraine, both with weaponry and on a humanitarian basis, just make sure they have the food that they need, given the dislocation there. Now they're trying to say that has to be subtracted from next year's defense spending parity, which they had already agreed to. So I'll just tell you, it's not going to happen.
All right, now Senator Lavrov, who's now joined the War Criminal Association, was talking to Al Jazeera, of all people, this morning about World War III going nuclear. Now, this is not the Cuban Missile Crisis yet. Do you worry that it might become the Cuban Missile Crisis?
Yeah, I think Hugh, they keep rattling the nuclear saber, and of course there's a lot of similarities we're seeing between what Hitler did in World War II and what Putin is doing and trying to consolidate now their ethnic, and in this case, Russian-speaking peoples. But this obviously is a new factor, and we don't know what Putin will ultimately do. But we can't be intimidated by that. NATO has an ability to resist that and to respond in kind. Heaven help us if it comes to that. But this is all Putin's saber rattling, and we need to call him on it.
Last question about this. My colleague at the Post, Mark Thiessen, asks, why is it that Russian aircraft can fly in Ukraine but Western aircraft cannot? Do we still recognize the sovereignty of the Ukrainian government, including its sovereignty over its skies? If Russia had not invaded, would anyone object to NATO giving Ukraine fighter jets? That comes on word that the transfer of about 20 to 30 jets from NATO countries to Ukraine was canceled overnight. What's going on there, Senator?
Well, I'm sorry to hear that the transfer was canceled. I heard that Poland and other countries of NATO were going to transfer aircraft to help the Ukrainians. I think the challenge here, Hugh, is obviously people do not want NATO to get involved in a fight in Ukraine, which is not a party to the NATO North Atlantic Treaty. And so we're walking a very thin line there. Obviously, we don't know when and if Putin might cross that line and actually threaten our NATO allies, which we're obligated to defend under Article 5. But I think, unfortunately, I think we need to encourage our allies to provide those defensive weapons, including aircraft, so that the Ukrainian pilots can continue what they have been doing so far, which is to deny the Russians air superiority or at least exclusivity.
So I'll wrap up on a high note. I do want to compliment the president. His every inch of NATO is covered by Article 5 is a necessary reminder that Article 5 is not subject to exceptions drawn by Vladimir Putin. I think the whole chamber applauded that, didn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I tell you, Putin has done more to unify NATO and solidify the counterbalance or the check on him and Russia than anything else he could have done. Unfortunately, it's come at the expense of innocent Ukrainians, and we are all cheering them on and trying to provide them everything we can to help them defend themselves as well as humanitarian relief. I think it's going to be a long, hard slog for Vladimir Putin.
Oh, it's going to be a nightmare for Russia. He should get out while he can. Senator Cornyn, thank you. Always a pleasure talking to you. Someone who's had to sit through 20 states of the union getting up the next morning, I salute you, Senator John Cornyn. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by an old friend, Mark Brnovich, who's the Attorney General of Arizona. He intends to be the next senator from Arizona. I missed him last week when he was in Washington, D.C., arguing before the Supreme Court. Good morning, General. Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Thank you, Hugh, for having me on again.
Talk to me a little bit about the case last week before we go to the border situation in the State of the Union last night. How did the argument go?
Well, I thought the argument went really well. I mean, even objectively, you obviously, Hugh, you can never predict what a judge or a justice is going to do. But I thought that they were very skeptical of the Biden administration's argument. And just for everyone listening, the public charge rule is basically based on a federal statute for more than 100 years that says immigrants have to be able to support themselves. The Biden administration abandoned a rule that basically said that if you want to get legal status in the United States, you can't be on welfare or government benefits for more than 1 year of your first 3 years here. After the U.S. Supreme Court had agreed to hear the case, after the Department of Justice had tried to defend it in 4 different circuits, they abandoned the rule and they used a decision out of the Northern District of Illinois to say basically that the rule is unconstitutional, and then they withdrew the rule unilaterally without the proper legal notice and comment that's required under federal law. So it was very sneaky what they did, and as I kept saying, it was very unprecedented. And if the Biden administration won't defend the law, then the federal courts, the U.S. Supreme Court has to allow states to step in. And that was basically our argument, that when the federal government's not doing its job, the states should be allowed to intervene and defend a federal law or a federal rule.
Now, General, I was a general counsel of 2 federal agencies. I never tried to do anything without notice and comment because I knew I'd lose. And sometimes even when you do notice and comment, you lose. But you got to do notice and comment. They withdrew this rule, which is in fact a new rule, without notice and comment. Did anyone speak up about that, like Justice Alito, anybody?
Yeah, I mean, yes, the justices clearly seem to be troubled by that. Even at one point, I either Justice Kavanaugh or Justice Gorsuch had even asked the Biden administration about, the precedent for this, because, Hugh, part of the argument is, and they've asked me this as well, is, well, anytime you get a change in administration, they're going to change policies, right? And, I said, look, we understand that, but the Trump administration went through the painstaking rule and comment process. They did the rule the right way. So therefore, if you want to withdraw it, you have to do it the right way. And that means notice and comment rulemaking. And so if they wanted to rescind or replace it, and some of the other justices, even Justin Breyer, seemed to recognize that this was very sneaky and it was unprecedented, at least, using those words. And, it clearly was designed by the Biden administration like too cute by half. I mean, they clearly wanted to withdraw this rule, and they did it in a way where they, quite frankly, it was a strategic surrender. What they did.
I'm looking ahead to 2025, and I'm thinking to myself, if we lose this case, I don't think you will, by the way, but if we lose this case, future presidents are just going to withdraw rules. That's all they're going to do then, without notice and comment. General, what did you make about the State of the Union and the giant non-discussion of an open border through which millions of undocumented immigrants are flowing, but also fentanyl by the truckload?
Yeah, Hugh, it's disappointing. And I am a first-generation American. My parents lived through World War II. They lived through communism. And, the promise of America is that the rule of law has to mean something, that we can't have disorder. You can't have chaos on our southern border. And as you know, just this last year alone, more than 2 million people illegally entered this country. It's like the equivalent of, Wyoming, Alaska, and Vermont combined. I mean, literally just in 1 year. And then you throw in the fact that the cartels have seized control. The Biden administration has let them seize control, and you've had a record amount of fentanyl. And the price, for example, of fentanyl, a fentanyl pill in Arizona now. Now, I get all the prices, and we're involved in our office in prosecuting, drug crimes. And the price of a fentanyl pill here in Arizona has literally gone in 1 year from about $20 a pill to about $4 to $5 a pill. So the price of fentanyl, not just in Arizona, but throughout this country, is dramatically falling. And that means that kids are going to die. Someone's niece, nephew, son, granddaughter is going to die because of the Biden policies. And so literally last year, 100,000 people, more than 100,000 people died of fentanyl opioid-related deaths. And, I mean, as you know, that's the equivalent of almost 2 Vietnam wars. And so just in 1 year. So our country, people are dying. Americans are dying as a result of the Biden administration's failed policies. And he seems to think if he ignores it, it's going to go away, and it's not. Because it's in Arizona's backyard now, in Texas's backyard, but it's coming to everyone else's front door very soon.
General, what is the biggest, we got 1 minute left, what is the biggest issue in the Arizona GOP Senate primary?
I think that people want candidates that understand Arizona values and represents and defends them, as I've done my entire career, and whether that, and it comes down to security, Hugh. And that means border security and economic security and security in our own neighborhoods. And whether that's protecting us against the gangs, whether it's protecting us against federal overreach and making sure we're energy independent, or protecting our borders and enforcing the rule of law, it really comes down to one word, security. And there is no one better qualified or capable, based on my record as a gang prosecutor, federal prosecutor, and what I've done as AG to provide security to Arizonans than I am.
Attorney General Mark Brnovich, thank you for carving time out. It's very early in Arizona, but we're on in Tucson and Prescott and, of course, Phoenix this morning. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for getting up early. Hey, America, I'll be back again tomorrow with, look, it's a terrible State of the Union, but the State of the Union is strong despite our president not being strong. By tomorrow, maybe we will have sanctioned Russian oil. Call your senator, call your congressman, tell them to sanction Russian oil today. The atrocities are piling up. We shouldn't pay for them. I'll be back tomorrow. Adam, thank you. Ben, thank you. General Ismail, thank you. On the next Hugh Hewitt Show.